So this guy, R.C. Sproul, is talking about the same kind of a thing that I was talking about before, but he is coming at it from a few different places, and one of the things that he says here is really interesting. Let me see if I can find it.
And Mill looks at the pain and the sorrow and the suffering and the moral evil in this world, and he said, wait a minute, these two ideas, the goodness of God and the omnipotence of God, in light of the reality of evil, cannot logically cohere or coexist. His argument is this: if God is all powerful and has the power to create a universe without evil, or has the power to rid the universe of evil at any given moment, if he has the power to do it, and he doesn't do it, then he's not good, or he's not loving. Because what kind of being who has omnipotent power could stand by and observe the pain, the suffering, and wickedness in a universe of his own creation and not eliminate it?
So what I would say as an argument against Mills's view as put forth by R.C. Sproul, or I guess in the other word, more accurately, the way that I would argue against the idea that God can't be good because of the presence of evil in the world, is there is no such world that does not have some destructive element to it. The act of creation, in and of itself, destroys whatever existed before it. So when I create, let's say, a painting on a canvas, the canvas is blank, and by me painting on it, it destroys the canvas as it was before. There is no way that God would have been able to create something, world in which there was no evil except that which he already exists in, or God already exists in. God exists in a realm in which there is no time, in which there is no space. Because God created time and God created space, or I should say, the finitude ordered sequence of events where events last for a non-infinite amount of time. If God creates a world in which events don't last forever, in which there is change, then there must be a finality to each individual event where it ends. Because if the event never ends, if it just goes on and on and on and on, then there's nothing that gets painted on that canvas. It just remains blank forever. So it isn't really accurate to say that it's an act of destruction to create something in and of itself, but it would be if God did that, because God would have to extend himself throughout all of existence forever. Imagine a world in which there was no evil. Well, what's the difference between that and heaven? And does not God already live in heaven? And is God not the only one, by Jesus' own admission, who is good, or absolutely good? Well, the world in which there is no evil is the world in which there is only God. So there's a way of arguing that creation itself is evil, which is what R.C. Sproul's getting at with this video, is if you look at it like the blank canvas and say the blank canvas is destroyed by painting on it, that the introduction of finality itself, the act of individualized destruction, where parts get destroyed but the whole remains, if you argue that that's evil because there is a little bit of destruction in that, our lives end. We don't live forever. Everything eventually decays. If you get rid of that, the only alternative would be a timeless, spaceless area, which would be heaven. And if there were no change and there was no life in order for us to change the way that we look at things, then we would never have been born, at which point the only occupant in that area would be God. So ostensibly, God could have lived like that for a long time, but then at some point, God chose to create. God chose to take a step back and give room to things that are relativistic, that are finite, that don't last forever, so that there could be some change, that there could be something that happens other than himself just existing by himself, for himself, of himself, forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever. There's not really any point in that. If God just existed and that was it, and there was no creation, there would be no point. So in order for there to be a purpose, there has to be evil. In order for there to be growth and change in mortals, in finite beings, then there has to be a little bit of destruction and therefore a little bit of evil. And that's why God never kills the devil. God doesn't view creation as a totality as evil, as if he never should have created it, and destroys absolutely everything. There's the story of the flood and all of that stuff. Sodom and Gomorrah, blah, blah, blah. There's lots of examples in the Old Testament of quote unquote God destroying. Well, like I say, it isn't that existence shouldn't exist unless it were perfect. That's a devilish way of looking at the world, that the only value that it could have would be in its perfection. And if it doesn't have perfection, then it has no value. That mentality is of the devil. That mentality says that existence is not worthy of existing, that the act of creation is evil because it creates evil. So, never minding the fact that it also creates goodness. If there is creation, and if there is a finality to time and space where it's finite, and a world in which there is destruction innately built into it, every individual part of it does decay. If that's the case, how can we say that existence is good? We say that by saying that creation is good. So even if it is creation of evil, even if it is creation of small parts that do decay and have that finality and that finitude, it's still okay because it allows for all that goodness in between the birth and the death. There is the life. If there were no purpose to life, then the devil would have a point, and we'd have to give the devil his due and say, yeah, existence really isn't worth existing. Life isn't really worth living if there's nothing in between birth and death. So the only way that we can really disregard the idea of creation itself, which does include creating evil. Before the creation, there was no evil, but there was also no good. There was just God alone. And in order for there to be meaning, in order for there to be a journey, in order for there to be a relation, relativity, meaning and purpose and direction, there has to be an arc, there has to be somewhere else to go. If it was only God, then there would be one point and everything would be a singularity. And that singularity would never change, so there'd be no time. And it would go everywhere and be everything, so there would be no space in which it didn't fill, and no time in which it didn't exist. And so there's not really a way of God doing that and having meaning, because there's nothing there to mean anything. It's just God alone in this singularity, and that's it. And it doesn't change, and it doesn't go anywhere, and no one else is there. It's just God. That doesn't allow for meaning or purpose or direction, because it doesn't go anywhere, so there's no direction. And it doesn't mean anything because there's only one being there. And it doesn't have a purpose because nothing ever changes. And so why would God just sit there and do that? So then it is good to create because it creates goodness. And that goodness overpowers the evil because the evil subtracts itself. And so it's in a way also reminding us that we are evil, that we're all sinners. Just by being finite, we are inevitably sinners. So the wages of existence is death. And it's still good because we got to have the life in between the birth and the death. We got to have goodness. We got to experience goodness, and we got to give goodness to others, and that goodness can compound among people and pervade throughout existence. Whereas if it were only God or nothing, those would both be equally purposeless. There would be no purpose to it. There'd be no value of that situation. The reason that I think that God created, even though it cost evil as a necessary part of creation, and God did it anyway, in my opinion, because there is no purpose in solitude.